Most people think survival is about finding more fuel, bigger fires, bigger stockpiles, more wood, more propane, more gasoline. But after spending an entire day testing a stove built from compressed sawdust, something became painfully obvious. In a real blackout during a winter storm, after a supply chain collapse, or in the middle of a disaster when everyone else is desperately searching for fuel, the people who survive longest are often the ones who need the least. And what shocked me wasn't that this homemade sawdust stove worked. What shocked me was how little fuel it actually consumed, while continuing to produce useful heat hour after hour. When someone first told me a cylinder of tightly packed sawdust could burn for nearly 8 hours, I assumed it was survival folklore, the kind of story repeated around campfires, until nobody remembers where it came from. Then I built one and watched it slowly prove me wrong. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about fuel during emergencies. The real enemy isn't running out of energy. It's wasting energy faster than you realize. Most people build fires that look impressive, but operate horribly inefficiently. Huge flames leap into the air. Heat escapes in every direction, and within an hour half the wood pile is gone. Human beings are strangely attracted to large flames because our brains associate visible fire with safety. Physics doesn't care about your feelings. Physics only cares about efficiency. A roaring fire may look comforting, but if most of that heat disappears into the atmosphere, you're essentially burning survival time. The sawdust stove works because it exploits a surprisingly simple principle. Instead of allowing fuel to burn rapidly across a large surface area, it compresses countless tiny wood particles into a dense cylinder. Oxygen enters through a central chimney-like channel, creating controlled combustion that moves gradually downward. The fire doesn't attack the entire fuel supply at once. It consumes it slowly, almost methodically. Imagine the difference between dumping your entire bank account onto a casino table versus living off a carefully managed budget. One creates excitement, the other creates longevity. In survival situations, longevity wins every time. When I lit the center channel, the initial flame looked almost disappointingly small. No dramatic inferno, no cinematic explosion of heat, just a narrow column of fire quietly establishing itself inside the fuel. For the first 20 minutes, I kept expecting it to fail. Instead, it stabilized. Then something fascinating happened. The stove entered a kind of thermal equilibrium. The combustion zone remained concentrated while surrounding sawdust gradually dried, heated, and prepared itself to burn. The process became self-sustaining. Heat from the active combustion area preconditioned the next layer of fuel. It's almost like watching a slow-moving chain reaction designed by someone obsessed with efficiency. What makes this especially valuable during a collapse scenario is fuel availability. Think about it. After a major disaster, everyone looks for the same resources. Firewood disappears, propane tanks empty, gas stations become chaos zones, yet sawdust, wood shavings, agricultural waste, and similar biomass often remain overlooked. Entire workshops generate mountains of it. Furniture factories throw it away. Carpenters sweep it into piles. In normal times, it's waste. In survival conditions, it's stored energy waiting for someone smart enough to recognize it. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. As the stove continued burning, another lesson became impossible to ignore. Heat management matters just as much as fuel management. Most people focus entirely on generating heat, not retaining it. That's a mistake civilization has repeated for centuries. Ancient humans survived brutal winters not because they always had more fuel, but because they learned to trap warmth. Every degree of retained heat is fuel you don't have to burn later. During my test, I noticed that even modest heat output became surprisingly useful when concentrated. Water heated steadily. Food cooked slowly. The surrounding area remained comfortable. Survival isn't about creating tropical conditions in the wilderness. It's about staying above dangerous thresholds. There's also an important biological reality here. The human body burns enormous amounts of energy trying to stay warm. When core temperature begins dropping, performance collapses faster than most people realize. Decision-making deteriorates. Dexterity disappears. Judgment becomes unreliable. Hypothermia doesn't arrive dramatically. It sneaks in through 1,000 small mistakes. That's why efficient heating systems are more than convenience. They're force multipliers. Every calorie your body doesn't spend fighting the cold can be used for movement, problem-solving, and survival. Several hours into the burn, I began appreciating something that rarely appears in survival manuals. Psychological stability. Listen, nobody talks enough about the mental side of prolonged emergencies. Constantly feeding a fire every 15 minutes creates stress. You become chained to it. You can't rest. You can't focus on other tasks. Your attention becomes consumed by fuel maintenance. The sawdust stove reduced that burden dramatically. Once established, it required minimal intervention. That may sound trivial until you've spent a freezing night managing a traditional fire. Sleep deprivation has ended more survival situations than lack of equipment ever did. Of course, the stove isn't magic. It has weaknesses, moisture is one of them. Wet sawdust burns poorly because much of the available energy gets diverted into evaporating water. Before combustion can proceed efficiently, that moisture must be removed. This is basic thermodynamics at work. Water absorbs tremendous amounts of heat during phase change. In practical terms, wet fuel steals energy from your fire. That's why proper storage matters. A barrel of dry sawdust can represent days of cooking fuel. A barrel of soaked sawdust can become a frustrating science experiment. Another lesson emerged as darkness arrived. Visible flames are often overrated. What actually matters is sustained heat release. Many survival myths focus on dramatic campfires because they're visually impressive. The sawdust stove challenged that assumption. Much of its effectiveness came from controlled glowing combustion rather than aggressive flames. In fact, excessive flames often indicate fuel being consumed faster than necessary. Nature offers similar examples. Charcoal burns differently from fresh wood because volatile compounds have already been driven off. The result is slower, steadier energy release. The sawdust stove exploits comparable principles through fuel density and airflow control. Then came the moment that truly changed my perspective. 6 hours had passed. Most improvised fires using an equivalent amount of loose material would have been long dead. Yet the stove continued producing useful heat. Not spectacular heat, useful heat. And survival often depends on understanding that distinction. Movies convince people they need dramatic solutions. Reality rewards boring reliability. The shelter that doesn't collapse. The water filter that keeps working. The stove that quietly burns while everyone else is searching for more fuel.